and welcome to the Gold Goats and Guns podcast for today, Monday, November 7th, 2022. My name is Tom Luongo, and we have a lot to talk about. Today, I'm joined with me on the eve of probably the most consequential U.S. midterms since at least 1992. I have with me today Matt Ehret. And Matt and I had on earlier in the year, and Matt and I haven't had a chance to talk really since I had him on the podcast then. And the first time I got a chance to meet Matt was when we did the roundtable discussion about whether Putin is a WEF agent with All Guardian and Off Guardian and Whitney Webb and all those guys, which was fun. And so Matt and I have been chatting back and forth since then. And I'm like, it's been a coon's age. It's time to have him back on, because I think at this moment in time, Matt's historical perspective on the way things are operating, I think, is a really interesting dovetail to a lot of the things that I've been talking about. And so I wanted to pick his brain on a couple of those things. So Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So now, with this said, before we started recording, we got talking about the cycles of history and cause and effect and all of this stuff, because we're here at a moment in time where we're reaching, I think, this big end of this big cycle of history, but we're dealing with people who firmly believe that there's no causal link of, in history, that, that history is just some things that happen, as opposed to a series of events that, lead from one into the other, into the other, into the other. And you were relating, some of these ideas as to the mindset of the people that are trying to do narrative control around all of the events of the day, that kind of try to support this idea, mostly, of course, in my mind, to absolve them of any blame or to obfuscate any intention on their part for purposely trying to destroy people's lives. So let's start there, and then we'll just see where we go from there. So that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. And for those who weren't privy to our private conversation, which is pretty much everybody listening, we were using this example. I threw out this case study of a very, very useful gatekeeper who does a pretty good job for his handlers, who's a Harvard-based historian from Britain, named Niall Ferguson. And Niall has written a lot of books that are deemed sort of authoritative gospel on the cause of World War I, on so many big matters: the cause of the Anglo-liberal establishment, the takeover of the Orange Revolution by the Dutch in 1688, the creation of the Bank of England. He's sort of known as a bit of a financial historian, and again, very Delphic, sleight of hand type of character. I think he's earning his paycheck pretty well, and he wrote an article. And in it, he makes the excuse that to be a responsible historian, one needs to only recognize the measurable facts of history and see history kind of like a mechanical machine. And in that machine, you cannot say that causal intentions that happened, let's say, or intentions in general that transcend the measurable components of the machine, have any impact on what is happening in your present world or future or anything. And he gives the example of how some people are stupid enough to attribute the causes of World War I to the ousting of Otto von Bismarck in 1890. And he's like, that is the most incompetent, superstitious idiocy, because that happened in 1890 and World War I was initiated in 1914. And we all know the cause of World War I was the shooting of the Archduke by the Black Hand of Serbia. And he's like, obviously. Now, the sleight of hand, for those who haven't figured it out, is that history is shaped by, and if you're watching Tom's show, you've probably come to discover on some level that intentions, conspiracies, agendas, ideas shape history. What is the weight of an idea? Where is it located? What about an intention? Right? These are not material things, but they are definitely causal. And I was giving the example of me, like, dropping my mouse. I just dropped my mouse. What caused that? The mechanic or mechanical historian would say, well, it was caused by my hand opening up, and they could have like an infinite regression of little mini mechanical causes, but they would miss the fact that I have an intention to make a point. Right. Now, the irony of that for Niall Ferguson and people who think like him is that the reason why I even have that idea as a good idea that I judge to be a good idea and that I'm using right now is because I read Socrates or Plato from the Phaedo dialogue, which was written 2,300 years ago, where Socrates, upon his deathbed, makes that very point when he's told to drink the hemlock for having, committed the crime of corrupting the minds of the youth and, undermining the gods of Athens.
Right.
He's now sitting, waiting to take the poison, which the demos has seen fit to, punish him with. And he's like, well, he used that very same point. And so you could say, well, what caused me to do that isn't just my intention, but it was an intention that has been shaped by something that happened 2,300 years ago in ancient Athens, and my just reviewing of that thought, which has influenced me, right? So the oligarchy knows that intentions shape processes, and they work to keep their victims in a materialistic cage where all we think we can use is our five senses to measure things, plot things, create a model, and then hypothesize or create some extrapolation about what is shaping the model with no regard for truth. Right. Because as we've discovered, a lot of models, whether it's about pandemics or whether it's about climate change or whether it's about what the economy is doing and where it's going to go, they could just be influenced by whatever experts in a high priest position who can read the formulas or shape the programming of the code that goes into the computer model to get whatever results they want with no regard for reality. So it's all just a big sleight of hand.
Right. And it's very clear that this is a means of narrative control that is something that, it's powerful, because with at least with people who don't know how to think. And this is one of the things that my partner and I, Dexter White, have been talking about, like behind the scenes, like what's the ethos of Gold, Goats, and Guns, and if we're going to spin up like anything, if we were going to talk about anything else, like what are we shifting into as a product, as a thing that we put out into the world, is like, it's just reminding people that how you think about things and how you shape your arguments is very powerful. And like they've done everything imaginable to rob us of our reason, to rob us of our ability to do cause and effect. It's like, no, really, history doesn't have any through lines. It's just a bunch of shit that happened. And Neil Ferguson is obviously one of those guys. Like, oh, it's just a bunch of shit that happened. And we don't really can't explain anything because people are irrational or whatever they are. And like no, really, I think there's some deeper things going on in that. So, what touched off this conversation before we started recording was, I was saying that, we're in a moment in time, I think, at the end of the cycle of history where, we're coming to the end of this. And I brought up the idea of the Vietnamese foreign minister speaking to Henry Kissinger, back 30, 40 years ago now, saying, and Kissinger said, what do you think about the French Revolution? And the guy responded, I don't remember his name, but you do, and you'll tell me in a second, which is, well, it's just too early to tell. And to give you an idea, which is an example of how some cultures and some people, see things in a bigger timeline than, oh, I just dropped my mouse. Like, and this is the difference. Like, we're all supposed to be these dogs living in the present. I don't know if you know anything about dog psychology. Dogs don't have much. They have some memory, but they have emotional memory. They don't really they live in the moment. Dogs are great because they live in the moment. And they kind of want us to all just kind of live in the moment. Like, well, that's what we outsource that to our dogs, guys. That's what the dogs are for, so that we can sit down and actually view the tapestry of history and look at the threat assessment and have time and energy and discernment. That's what our brains do in order to get this shit done. Like, this is like reality. And so what I said to Matt beforehand is a point that I've made in other interviews and whatnot, not really on this podcast, which is that, given the current state of affairs, and given my position as both a market analyst and a geopolitical analyst, and not necessarily as much a historian, this is part of the reason why I wanted Matt on today, because it's, as a historian, my command of the facts of history are not great. So I bring people on who have a better understanding of history than I do, certainly. So you have this moment where, well, at the French Revolution in the minds of Asians, of ancient Asian cultures, is at the 200 years in arrears. It's too early to tell what the outcome of that is in their minds. I said, well, let's think about the situation today with the Federal Reserve, Europe, the Bank of England, the British Crown, and it just popped in my head one day. Well, it's the same thing that's happening now. It's like, we have this moment in time where the American Revolution, we should ask that same question of the American Revolution, which is to say, What do you think of the American Revolution? And I'm at the point now where I'm saying it's too early to tell,
Yeah.
because the United States banking system has always been subordinate to European imperatives.
Yeah.
And in modern times, it's been the imposition of the argument I've been making is the imposition of LIBOR as the debt indexing rate for basically all of Europe and the United States, and then how that has had ruinous effects, I believe, on American domestic monetary and foreign policy over the last century or more than a century, and that we're now at a moment in time where it's very clear that mechanistically speaking, the U.S. financial system and the stewards of it are declaring independence. And so, my argument has been that the British Crown has wanted their colonies back since the day after Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown. And Jerome Powell is going, yeah, but I no longer have to be beholden to LIBOR, and I can set monetary policy for my banks that I'm in charge of and that I'm beholden to. And no longer am I beholden to City of London, Frankfurt, Amsterdam, Milan, that all those guys. So that's what sparked this entire original conversation. And when I said that to Matt, your response was, "Ooh, that's interesting." Like, and yeah, I think it is.
Well, absolutely. And I like the sensitivity to the long waves of the long, more subtle but important waves of history that a lot of people don't pay attention to, because it's sort of easy to see the car accident, the person getting hit by the car outside when you look out the window, and it's like a crazy accident. It's really, really visceral imagery of what happened. But to actually appreciate that, a couple of weeks earlier, that person driving the car had caught his wife cheating on, with this guy who he just hit in the car. Like, it takes more mind work to hold that in the mind, and it's more subtle, maybe a bit more boring in some ways to get that part of the backstory, but it's like present and it's efficient as a causal effect. And if you were just a mechanist, you wouldn't really pay any regard to that. Because you'd just be saying, well, what caused this person to get hit and die? Well, it was this car moving at this speed, at this weight, at this, but the fact is, yeah, you're right. Like, the American experiment is an experiment. It is not a finished product. Nobody should have ever treated the United States in what happened in 1783, when the British delegation did not show up at the Peace of Paris signing. You have that painting that's half finished, and you have the American delegation sitting there with Ben Franklin and John Jay and a few others. The British delegation's not there. Benjamin West, the painter, had to just say, well, abort. They're just not going to show up. So, and I selected that painting for the cover of the first volume of the Unfinished Symphony, the Clash of the Two Americas, Volume 1, Unfinished Symphony. And I have that painting there because I think it just speaks so loudly that, the entirety of the 19th century and then into the 20th, into the present, it has been shaped by the lack of recognition and acceptance by the part of British grand strategists that this happened. And not only that, but they had been utilizing and cultivating fifth columnists, people who maybe on the surface acted like they were loyal American patriots, but in reality were always United Empire loyalists to their core, always obedient
right.
to commands, influence from the British, the City of London operations, the Colonial Office, the Foreign Office, run by people like Jeremy Bentham, who, by the way, I'll just say, to get a taste of people are like, well, who would these fifth columnists be? Which I assert is at the heart of the deep state today. It's not in any way disconnected of what happened and what was built up in the 1780s and 90s in America. One example, if people want to know, Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr lived with Jeremy Bentham, the head of the British Foreign Office, in his mansion for 5 years straight between 1807 and 1812. Aaron Burr, the former vice president, lives with Jeremy Bentham. Why? Why does he do that before being deployed back to the United States a few weeks before the War of 1812 is begun? Well, who the hell is Aaron Burr, right? I mean, Burr is a guy who was, yes, vice president, but he was caught. He was caught in 1807 for the third time orchestrating a secession movement to where the plan was, and there was a whistleblower, kind of like a Smedley Butler character on the inside, who he thought he could trust, who was part of the conspiracy to work with the British to take the Louisiana territories that had just recently been purchased 3 years earlier by Jefferson.
Right.
Hamilton was actually a key negotiator behind the scenes for a lot of that stuff. But the idea was to take the Western territories, have Burr with his lackey, Colonel Wilkerson, who was actually a Habsburg spy, and his letters have come to the surface over the ensuing years that prove that he was actually a Habsburg spy. Right. And they were going to work together to then declare war on the Spanish more broadly, specifically over Florida and I think it was New Orleans. Mm-hmm. British soldiers and some American mercenaries. The whole thing was run out of the house. This whole conspiracy in 1807 was run out of the house of a fellow named Andrew Jackson, who was part of the Burr machine. That was his matter, was the headquarters. And then one of the key figures, who I think was a senator, blows the whistle to Congress. They do court hearings. They have an actual hearing on the Burr conspiracy. They have testimonials, witnesses, evidence presented. Somehow Burr gets away because they didn't have the smoking gun until a few decades after Burr dies, where it comes out that Anthony Merry, who was the British ambassador to America, wrote to the Foreign Office in 1804, right when Burr loses, because he had tried this a few years earlier when he was running for the governor of New York. He needed to be the governor, though, to make that work. But in 1804, Anthony Merry writes to his home office saying, we have just acquired the services of Aaron Burr, who is the vice president, but he cannot do anything, and he wants to give his services to the British cause. This is great. And you could read the whole transcript. It's there in archival material from the 1890s on archive.org. You can read this thing. I cite it a lot because it's useful. And, so Burr, he ends up getting acquitted on some technicality, but the whole publicity about this conspiracy, which involved him going in, he was supposed to basically take control of the West, depose Jefferson as president, impose himself, and then declare separation from the slave states of the South, who would then become their own pro-British Confederacy. He would join the Canadian British Confederacy, reconstitute, undo the Constitution, reconstitute the nation under sort of new pro-British principles, and it would just undo the experiment again. So to recap,
but correct me if I'm wrong, Niall Ferguson would tell you that you're crazy for even thinking
that has nothing to do with the present, or that would have nothing to do with what happened in 1860, what blew up later. Now, what happened in 1860?
What are you talking about?
Yeah. There's several generations in between. You can't say one caused the other. So Burr at that point, he's given $40,000 by John Jacob Astor, because the public they were more literate back in those days, and people were reading the paper, getting transcripts and feedback over weeks of what was going on in the hearings. There was enough hate of Burr at this point by the masses all over the United States that he couldn't even walk outside without getting tomatoes thrown at him. So he had to escape to Canada, where his nephew-in-law was the Governor General of Canada. The Governor General of Canada was his nephew-in-law through marriage, who gave him personal letters to meet up with Bentham in Britain, Lord Castlereagh, who's organizing the Congress of Vienna. At that same time, they're setting the stage for what do we do when we put down the Napoleon project and then reconstitute oligarchism in Europe. That's the guy. That's Castlereagh, who's managing that whole thing with Metternich and a bunch of Jesuits. So this guy goes there. He lives with Bentham in a drug-infested, opium-infested, orgiastic 5-year period that he says the best time of his life.
It's like American colonial Eyes Wide Shut, for fuck's sake.
It really is, yeah. It really is that. And then he comes back and he reconstitutes his machine after 5 years, and people have now forgotten a little bit of the drama. But this is the third attempt. He had tried this in 1800 when he was running for the president against Jefferson. He was only subverted by one vote, and that was purely because Hamilton put his whole backing behind getting Jefferson elected president, which upset Burr's need to be the president to break the Union into a Northern South. And then Hamilton goes and does it again in 1804 when Burr is trying plot number 2 to become governor of New York, the economic engine of the colony, or the young republic. Mm-hmm. And he's again subverted by Hamilton, who makes him lose a second time, kills Hamilton. and he's already taken over control of Hamilton's Bank in New York, turned it into this speculative Bank of Manhattan mechanism that becomes beholden to the city of London. So all of a sudden, this thing, and I think everyone knows that story.
Just to clarify, I don't mean to interrupt, but I do, which is Bank of New York or Bank of Manhattan. Is that today what you would consider Bank of New York Mellon?
Yeah.
Okay. That makes perfect sense. So Bank of New York Mellon today, I think, is because it would have merged with somebody else. If it's the same organization, then that also tracks, because now Bank of New York Mellon is one of the major money center banks in New York today that I've identified as being completely on board with the continued European subversion of the United States. Bank of New York Mellon, BOFA. And then obviously BlackRock which isn't a bank, but it has aspirations of being a bank. So now so this is all fascinating. This is all cool. Something came up in conversation the other day that I wanted to ask you about, which is and this is what beforehand, before we started recording, I said to you, it's like something came up in conversation the other day. Can't remember what it was, but someone said, but ask Matt about this when you have him on the podcast, which is the following. Because and this is coming from somebody who's also in the story, and he said to me, like, I never thought about this. We have Napoleon, and we have the War of 1812. Napoleon goes to war on the same time that the British go to war against the United States. Same year, it's 1812. So I've never put those two things together. So I'm going to put you on the spot, and I want you to free associate now and tell me if there's any real, because you were kind of alluding to it a little bit. This because when your last statement just threw something together where you kind of, you've got Napoleon, and you've got and this is the thing that prompted me to say these things happen in the same year, the same calendar year.
Yeah, that was Napoleon's assault on Russia too. John Quincy Adams was the young ambassador at the time to Moscow or St. Petersburg, I guess.
Right.
That was almost that was an existential threat for both Russia and the United States at the same time. How exactly you're saying something that's so interesting.
I'm not saying anything here.
No, I mean you're bringing
things happen at the same time. So I'm going to put you on the spot and see if you can come up with something. I'm not, and you can deflect the question to be.
I mean, I'll answer it the way I can, but it's like an interesting set of associations that I've also been thinking about, and I haven't done the work to speak with any strong authority on this matter, but it's definitely not coincidental. What I can definitely say is Napoleon was not his own man, though much like the case of many of these sort of City of London funded fascist frontmen who are assigned to carry out a strongman task to do something for geopolitical effects that they themselves don't even fully understand. We saw this with the case of the rise of Hitler and Mussolini. Sure. Great examples. They were supposed to carry out a certain task, but they also they were a little bit inclined, especially Hitler, to go off the reservation at certain moments. Napoleon was definitely inclined. He had a godlike complex. He saw himself as a new Charlemagne, endowed and ordained by God to reorganize and reconsolidate all of Europe under one central command structure. And then beyond that, he was looking to Asia, to India, to other things to also consolidate under a new Roman Empire. That was certainly that benefited or would have benefited the logic of a big chunk of the oligarchy, the hereditary bloodlines that do go back a very long time, who were manipulating a lot of the empires. It seems like you got clashes of empires, and on a surface level you do, but when you get up to the upper echelons, you start seeing that there's more synergy amongst a lot of these families who interbreed and keep control of their property rights and their fondies that then they're sort of beholden to, and their kids are beholden to over many generations, which it gets you into this weird secret society occult world as well that you can't really avoid, but it gets kind of weird and disgusting. All that to say, it definitely benefited, that logic of what Napoleon wanted benefited a big chunk of what this unipolar romanticism of global feudalism was. It would have been beneficial in some ways to them, but on the other hand, the British Empire, which was nominally an enemy of Napoleon, also saw themselves, as we saw with Sir Edward Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire study, also published in 1776, as a strategic study commissioned by leading figures within the British Empire to figure out how the British could not make the mistakes of the Roman Empire and actually consolidate a one world government as a global unipolar central command system, which the Roman Empire came close but failed. And in Gibbon's work, the cause of Rome's failure, which the British strategists also realized they could avoid, is simply Christianity, the toleration and growth of Christianity per se. And if you didn't have that disturbing influence, Gibbon says there's no reason why it shouldn't have become the end of history forever empire of great success. So Britain, a lot of these Hellfire Club, and again, when you get into the upper level management, they might act like they're Christian or Anglican or whatever, but it really gets you into you're into some Luciferian stuff. They're thinking to themselves, well, okay, we can use this intel and work to try to reconstitute ourselves now. So you had basically different agendas trying to move into the same convergent destination, which was global feudalism under a global slave society of talking dogs, who would just be somehow obedient, like you said, to master commands.
And how is that any different than Klaus von Schnitzel and the World Economic Forum today?
Yeah, it's the same thing. So the fact that America was not a finished product, where it was a defeat, it was a successful battle, but it was nowhere. It was not the winning of a war. The war continued on for the next 250 years continuously. There's been no point where there has not been a war against the institution of the Republic. And there's been efforts incrementally where you've had, luckily, good leaders who are willing to die for their ideals and conscience, who are able to advance the emancipation of humanity more so, getting rid of the slavery thing. There's been moments that were good platforms, but that were towards improvement. But at the same measure, it wasn't a finished product, and it's been recolonized, in my view. And I think you've assessed the same thing by the same British enemy. Using their fifth columnists, their deep state operations, who have infiltrated, taken control of most every lever of influence that you can imagine. Not every, but many, too much.
But many of them. And from the media, I mean, because again, I've talked to people for years about, the British tabloidization of American media, right? That's really accelerated, once Helen Gurley Brown took over the Atlantic back in the 80s and all that. And it's just gotten worse ever since then. I think that's one modern interpretation of this. And it's clear when we're looking at the state of the world today on the eve of the midterm elections and this, desperate need for the British to meme us into another war with the Russians. It's just impossible to not see the parallels here. It's just impossible not to see them. And then wonder, and then when everybody turns around and, they just want to make fun of Joe Biden, I use that term with quotation marks, it's a classic European, British tactic of putting a weak person at the center of power of a powerful nation and then manipulating, and then allowing the flying monkeys, effectively kill the wicked witch of the West and allow the flying monkeys to actually run roughshod over the entire thing and go hog wild, creating chaos everywhere to their advantage, and then eventually bamboozle people through classic control system mechanisms of mass formation psychosis and all the other crap that they're throwing at us to then meme us into a world war with the Russians when anybody with 3 brain cells to rub together and make a spark realizes that, hey, they've got what we need. We have some of the things that they need. We should be able to come up with a mutually beneficial trade here. And yet it just seems to be the fucking House of Windsor keeps getting in the way and saying, no, you can't do that. Yeah. Like, it's crazy. Like, I mean, it's unbelievable. When I look and I start looking at like the strategic moves that are being made now about quote unquote national security over semiconductors, over this or that, for all these vectors, and the breaking of these relationships. It's all being done, with this idea. Okay, well, if you're not going to submit, then you're not going to have you don't get anything from us anymore. Yeah. And now the strategic asymmetries that exist technologically and monetarily and everything else, you know, that's where that's what we're being forced into a Hobson's choice to choose between. And, you know, when I look at the upcoming elections tomorrow, and obviously by the time this thing posts, will be post election day. But of course, we don't have election day in the United States anymore. We have election season that goes on for like 4 months. Like we get the vote for 6 weeks before the election, and then they get to count the votes for 6 weeks after the election. Because God forbid we're actually allowed to. I don't know. It's funny how everybody else can seem to count the votes in a fucking day, but here we are, the most powerful nation on the planet with all the technological advantages imaginable, and somehow we can't count the votes. Like, are you kidding? How about you play the other leg? How about you pull my other leg and it plays as a sucker born every fucking minute, you douchebag? Like it's just that's where we are. It's like it's so dumb. It's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous. I'm just waiting for the ghost of Jim Dale to come out and start doing his P.T. Barnum routine, for Christ's sake. And and the part of P.T. Barnum today will be played by Boris Johnson, for fuck's sake. Like, are you kidding me? Like, you believe this? What's wrong with you? And I hate to I never want to make fun of people, call them sheeple or being asleep. Or I never want to use those terms because people are far hipper to this crap than you want to believe that they are. But at the same time, I just think people just don't care because they just look at it and go, "You got to be kidding me! This is just dumb." Right? It can't be that dumb, Tom. I'm like, oh yeah, no, it really is that dumb. Yeah. Like, it really is just that stupid. And then they go, wow, you're right. I'm like, yeah, it really is.
Yeah, you don't want to give them too much credit. Like these wannabe lords of the universe want you to feel like they have all of this power and influence over everything, and everything has been pre-programmed for thousands of years. And yeah, sure. I mean, conspiracies have indeed been going on, for thousands of years. There have been continuous I say it all the time. There's been continuous oligarchical bloodlines operating with similar modus operandi for a very long time. Does that mean everything that they've ever wanted always just comes into play? Well, no. Hell's no. Yeah, exactly. Because if that was the case, why aren't we still in feudalism? Why aren't still like 98% of the population illiterate as they would have loved, and as was the case back in the 13th century?
And why would the population of the earth be nothing more than about 1 billion people? Because technologically, we wouldn't be able to sustain more than that. Like, so
not a chance.
Clear that technology and the forces of decentralization that come from the private exchange of goods and services is far more powerful than anything that they have, and any power they think they have. And I hate to ever call them the powers that be, or the people who control the world. They're the people who think they control the world, and that's actually worse because they have this solipsism and this arrogance to believe that they do actually have more power than they actually do, when all we really have to do is just step back and go, you know what? No.
Yeah.
And no. And we wind up doing that in our own kind of, everybody does it in their own way, in some way. And, I'm not much of a Randian anymore, but, John Galt wasn't wrong in that you just say no, and you just withhold some amount of yourself from them. Yeah. You still got to eat. You still got to, I was like, I pay my taxes, for Christ's sake. But at the same time, like, I'm not going to give them $1 more than I have to. They're never going to get my obedience, or they're not going to get my acceptance. They'll get my obedience, but they'll never get, my acceptance. And that difference is just enough. When multiplied by 7 billion people, that's enough to just, they can't overcome that. And that's the loss to the friction within all of their systems, that their control systems that aren't going to, that eventually, presage their downfall. The interesting question about all this right now, I think, is, have we reached, the end of that big arc of history that started with the formation of the Bank of England? And are we going to reach that moment in time where everybody's, and technology has reached the point where it's such a double-edged sword that they can't control it. And, you're younger than I am. You'll probably see more of what's likely to happen than I will. Right. I'm 54. And so how many years do I really have left? I don't know.
You only got a little head start off to me. I'm and I drink a lot of coffee, but The look, I think that there's these pregnant moments in history where things really come to a head. You know, kind of like when you're burning a branch, or not burning, like bending a branch. That's how I sort of see history. Is like, you know, like I'm bending my pencil, my wooden pencil, and not every moment is equivalent, right? At some point, there's a tension build up in that center point, and I don't want to. I like this pencil. I'm not going to break it, but people
No.
can imagine something's got to give.
We've
Right?
all seen Animal House. It's even better. It's John Belushi with the mouthful of mouthful of mashed potatoes. What am I? I'm a zit. Get it? And the whole thing explodes, and then food fight, and then the whole thing explodes. This is the moment in time we're living through, right?
Yeah, exactly. And these are moments of like either great crisis or great opportunity, but there's going to be a type of change. It's like putting somebody underwater for too long. You know, for the first few, maybe 10, 20, 30 seconds, you could maybe convince somebody that they're supposed to be a fish and their natural place is to like live underwater. But push it to a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. As much as that person might have been ideologically conditioned to think that water is their home, I guarantee you they're going to start spasming, and they're going to on a primal level go for oxygen, right? Regardless of how much their ideological conditioning impels them otherwise.
Right.
And I think we're in sort of that position today where there's a lot of people who have been led to believe by their cultural, educational, other forms of oligarchical programming that they're supposed to be one way. We're not supposed to have energy or dirty energy that's supposed to be bad for Gaia. We're not supposed to consume too many bad methane producing like farting cows. Those are bad. We should be eating bugs, or we should be eating less. We should be undoing fertilizer production, maybe 30-40% less fertilizers. We should be like having just less,
60% fewer people.
Yeah. And it sounds all well and good when you're in a situation of abundance. You could be like a white collar, you know, fluffy, comfortable, you know, person saying all of these things. But then when you actually have to start living it and feeding your family at the same time, that ideology gets slammed down by the universe and physical reality, where you are then forced to learn how to really swim or sink. And so I think there's going to be generally speaking, looking at the world today, I mean, I see sort of like you, there's two conflicting ideas of what the new order is going to be. You know, we hear the Russians, we hear the Chinese talking about the new world economic system. We hear similar words, fourth industrial revolution coming about. Right. And, you know, on a low level, if you're a nominalist who's just using pattern association thinking, you're like, oh, I associate these patterns of words with this very evil agenda. And thus, every time I see that pattern being spoken by a leader, it invokes the exact same meaning. And these people miss the fact that the operating principles and the very meaning of value, purpose, government, economy, all of these things are diametrically opposed, like in another universe, when it is spoken by somebody like a Glaziev or a Lavrov or a Putin or a Xi Jinping versus a Biden or Stoltenberg or Schwab or Gates or whatever freak you want to name. Right. Very different meanings of what that world system, that healthy ideal should be. And on the one hand, you have this idea that stasis is the best. That's the natural state of humanity, nature. Everything is mathematical, computer, stasis, equilibrium, entropy, full control. This is why Henry Kissinger also liked, as a segue or side note.
Just to tell you this, I'm a chemist and a high energy physicist, and I can tell you this: equilibrium is a myth. Equilibrium only exists on paper. It only exists as a thing. Chemical equilibrium, nothing is ever in any kind of chemical equilibrium. You know what equilibrium means?
Death.
The only time you have an equilibrium is at absolute zero, where there's no thermodynamic activity whatsoever. And anybody who's, you know, that. So what we're talking about here is the death of everything in order to get perfect control and no dynamism. We have to kill everything off. It's the only way to do it. There's no other way. This is, by definition, this is physically built within the way the universe works. I always said that, you know, for me, the big one was the Nernst equation, which describes the electrochemical activity in a cell, in a battery, in an electrochemical cell. Like, I remember, those lectures, and the guy and my instructor at the time saying, by the way, this thing doesn't work because it describes a state that you can never approach. because by definition, current's flowing. So this is at chemical equilibrium. But what does that mean? Well, obviously nothing. And so the same, what you're touching on here is this idea of stasis. And I hear this from, I used to have, some of my older friends that I went to college with and whatnot. Always, whenever we started talking about these things, they're like, we have to have standards. We have to have some basis in control of it. I'm like, no, humans are chaotic. Humans are in motion. Humans do things. You can't set this as the ground state and then build off of that. It doesn't work that way. It's all just this big, ugly, barely controlled, chaotic, dynamic system. And any attempt to control it just makes it worse and just spins it out of control that much faster. And what we're seeing from people like Klaus Schwab, and this comes directly from someone like Martin Armstrong, by the way, who has met Schwab, knows Schwab, has interacted with him. He's like, look, Klaus Schwab is like the ultimate control freak. Like any control freak you've ever met in your life, he's a laissez-faire capitalist compared to Klaus Schwab, who runs the World Economic Forum like a dictatorial, like a classic authoritarian dictator. I mean, he's maniacal about these things, and so he doesn't brook any dissension or anything like that. And so that mindset, and you can see that mindset's translated through all of his lieutenants, the Ursula von der Leyens, the Joseph Borrells, the Stoltenbergs, the Guy Verhofstadts, all of these people, the Donald Tusks, and all of these people. And you can see it everywhere. And so this is part of the problem that you're facing. So this is the kind of the core psychological defect that we're dealing with.
Yes, and I didn't realize that you were actually a trained chemist. That's
25 years as a bench and research chemist, dude. My undergraduate research was in transition metal rare gas clusters in the gas phase.
Okay.
So that we could make entries into the fucking JANIF tables of thermodynamic constants. I was doing this as an undergraduate. I worked with guys who created the laser. Okay, I just want to I'm going to put my bona fides on. At 22 years old, I was doing this shit. And so for a long time, I always said, I'm not particularly religious. If I believe it, if I have to describe God, it's the closest thing I come to is Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. This was most of my 20s. Today, it's a difference. It's closer to the non-aggression principle. But Heisenberg's uncertainty principle to me is I don't know what's going on. At a quantum level, we don't know how fast things are going, or we can either know where they're going, where they are, or where they're going. But we can't know both at the same time on anything other than hydrogen. So fuck off. And if you think you can control any of this shit, because the rest of it is just a bad mathematical approximation.
Yeah.
Bad. And there's so many lessons there to understand that as we observe the system, we inherently react, inherently alter it and change it, and reality itself is unfortunately a malleable thing, and all of this stuff is very, very powerful. And people like Schwab and these other folks really do believe there's one base reality that they can just impose on the entire universe. And it's what are you out of your fucking mind? Have you never read Philip K. Dick? We're all friggin' insane. No, stop it. Bad view. No biscuit.
Well, I think I'm going to share with you a recent article that I'm publishing a 5-part series on strategic culture right now, and it's going to culminate with it begins with the cult of Aristotle at the heart of the current rise, or the recent rise of transhumanism. So where does that come from? What sort of underlying sacred cows do these freaks worship? What do they worship? And the cult of entropy emerges directly out as a continuous process from Aristotle, I would actually say, who asserts without really any evidence that there is a master-slave dichotomy built into the fabric of nature itself in his Politics, Book 4. He actually literally says that most are born slaves, some are born masters. It is endowed at birth. And he also says that we have no soul. We are tabula rasa, that everybody is just to be written on by whatever is dominant in the world that they live in. So whoever has this Nietzschean will to power and can assert their opinion onto the system as a system and shape the definitions, the dictionaries, whatever, then that will be what is imposed upon the young babies being born into said whatever system it would be. And thus there is no universal principles of genuine truth, or that because you'll have one truth for the master, one truth for the slave. You can't have one truth that's common to both, because the master is the master. They have their own justice, their own honor, their own freedom, and the freedom of a slave is a different freedom from the master. So you got this like weird sort of at the heart of cultural relativism, which has been a big part of like the recolonization of much of the world and the prevention of much of Africa, India, South America from accessing advanced technology and scientific development especially since the days that people like Klaus Schwab's mentor, Henry Kissinger, imposed Malthusianism as the governing agenda of U.S. foreign policy onto Africa and onto Latin America with his NSSM 200, which was basically just saying, negative population growth has to become the primary priority for the U.S. government now. And we're going to let go of the former ideology of people like Bobby Kennedy, John F. Kennedy. Pretty much most of U.S. history was shaped by an impulse to want to help poor countries liberate themselves from colonialism, from the empires, and stand on their own 2 feet by giving them access to the best quality technology and fish, not just give them fish, not just give them foreign aid. That was like a big tradition. That was a good tradition, which people like Kissinger said has to stop immediately. The new priority, mathematical equilibrium, entropy, is like the new godhead that has to serve our all of our decision making for what are the conditionalities upon which an African country receives a loan.
Unfortunately, Matt's internet connection died at that moment, and it was really no good, elegant way for me to stitch the before and the after together seamlessly. So I'm just going to take a short break and let a couple of random ads play, and then we'll be right back and let Matt finish his thought. All right. And we're back. So I'm going to let Matt continue what he was talking about in relation to Africa.
Yes, yeah, so this whole idea that Africa can only have appropriate technologies that do not influence their natural tribal ecosystems or noble savage relationship to nature. So a windmill or a solar panel, that really won't allow you. And it is known by those promoting this ideology, which is why Africa is still to this very day in a dark age situation with 600 million people living without electricity.
Right.
Despite the fact that hundreds of billions of dollars, trillions of dollars over decades has been given to Africa. Why don't they have basic needs met after all of this so-called aid was given since the 60s or 50s? Well, it's because the intention has always been, especially with the advent of people like these Malthusians, Maurice Strong, Kissinger, Klaus Schwabians, all of these nasty anti-humanists who got into the controls of what would be the determinants of conditionalities, foreign aid, other things, that they would only get technologies that kept them in a state of squalor, just barely alive enough to like exist, let alone fight back for anything. Meanwhile, the actual companies that have taken control of Africa as a continent, like a giant slave colony for extraction of rare earths, has been intentionally dominated by Barrick Gold, other forms of Western mining interests, mostly tied to the London Stock Exchange and British Commonwealth territories for not a coincidence reason. And so these countries, it's equilibrium. They're worshiping at this idea that entropy, the second law of thermodynamics, is a universal constant. And I don't even know if they necessarily believe that in their heart of hearts. I think that they personally, in my view, I think that they've used it as an expedient, a useful standard around which to organize their oligarchical systems.
Of course.
But I think that they themselves know, like what you've observed, that the evidence demonstrates that there is a profound disequilibrium embedded in the creative. Every evidence of the universe, from the formation of stars, galaxies out of galaxies, the organization of like living systems going from like simple celled amoebas all the way up to us having this like complex interaction over electricity, indicates that there is like creative spontaneity and an organized harmony at the same time embedded in the fabric of physical space-time. And I think the oligarchy at the higher level knows that. But again, they choose to use this entropy idea, which just came about from like people looking at heat engines and just how heat will always go.
I do believe in the second law of thermodynamics. I do believe in entropy
as a universal, though. Do you believe it as a universal?
Sure. But I also believe.
I don't think it's universal.
Malthus is always wrong. Okay. Any don't get me wrong. I just want to make sure that we get the terms like, where we are in this, properly. Malthus is always wrong, right? And the reason Malthus is always wrong is because we have the ability to lay our will upon the universe and organize matter in ways that, yes, at a universal level, yeah, the entropy of the universe is always going to increase, but that doesn't mean that we can't create localized order out of out of chaos. We can do this. We do it every day. There's a cost. There's going to be a loss due to friction and whatnot, and that's fine. There's an abundant amount of energy in the universe that we can use for our own devices. For these people, it's bound up in their worry that it goes. I think it goes all the way back to Julian. It doesn't go back all the way back to, but in modern
He's a big one.
times, it goes back to Julian Huxley and UNESCO and this whole idea that we should not have access to cheap and abundant energy because human beings are a virus that will foul their own nests and grow uncontrollably in such a way that we will destroy the earth and therefore destroy ourselves. And no, that's not it at all. That's what they sell us. They sell technology as a kind of modern version of original sin doctrine to when they replaced Christianity with the state. The reality is that that we can do wondrous things with the energy that's available to us and harness it for our own purposes. And they know that if they don't control the energy and our access to energy density and its transformative potential, then we don't need them anymore. That's really all this is about. And Malthus is just another way of making us feel guilty. All variations on making us feel guilty for even being alive in the fucking first place. And this is just a control system. And they've taken and they've perverted Aristotle. They perverted original sin doctrine in Christianity. They perverted all of this stuff by saying, okay, we don't have the spark of divinity. We don't have that spark of being one with the universe to create something out of nothing. We don't have that, and we don't deserve to have that. And the biggest trick they've ever pulled on us is making us think that our being alive is somehow a debt that we can never repay back to the universe. And that is fundamentally fucking bullshit. Fucking bullshit.
I like that, Rich.
And I broke no argument about this. Every fucking Marxist I've ever talked to says, "Oh, your rights are negotiated and they don't really exist and they're all constructs and all bull." I'm like, yeah, really? What's your name?
Well, you know what?
I just look at them. I go, "What's your name?" And they go, blah. And I go, really, blah? So if your rights don't exist, how do you assert an I? How do you assert an identity? Fuck you. You exist. Like, screw you. You exist. You telling me that you exist. Now the question is whether or not you deserve to exist as opposed to me. How about this? Why don't you shut the fuck up? And why don't you shut the fuck up and we'll call it even?
Yeah.
Like, go fuck yourself. We'll call it even. I'm dead serious. This is the thing that really triggers me because it's so very freaking obvious that it doesn't matter whether you believe in God or the non-aggression principle, whatever you use to justify your existence, do so. And don't apologize for it. Never apologize for it because they're trying to make you feel guilty for being alive. What the hell with you? And this is what we absolutely need. This is as people in this space, we can absolutely disagree about some of the things that are actually happening out there and all the rest of it. And I'm happy to have disagreements or conversations about whose motivations are purer than others and who's working for what side and all the rest of it. But at the end of the day, we all realize that all the forces of control are just that. They're just shitty forces of control. Why? Because they don't want to give anything up. Because they don't actually want to work for a living. They just want to turn the whole place into a friggin' farm. And we're just cattle. And we're just cattle to that. I got news for you. There's 7 billion of us, and there's like 1,000 of you.
Yeah.
I'm long guillotines and rope makers.
Well, yeah.
Sorry.
No, I'm absolutely.
I think it's good. I make that rant abundantly clear. Yeah.
No, it's good. We need that genuine righteous indignation because it's really people get again they cower too much and they don't find the proper level of appropriate disdain for this pathetic force of whiny babies trying to impose their ideology onto the world that doesn't behave the way it wants, right? They're not getting their cookies. And so they temper tantrum, but unfortunately with a little bit too much power.
Unfortunately, because they're throwing temper tantrums with nuclear weapons.
Well, that's the problem, right? But they are the useless eaters. And I mean, we hear all of these people, these Malthusians, always talking about how do you control or eliminate the useless eaters, and the eugenicists come out of that. And Francis Galton and H.G. Wells are whining about that, and Bertrand Russell is whining about the useless eaters and Harari.
Right.
But it's like, yeah, there are useless eaters on this planet, but you're projecting. Like, these are people who have been trained to not have, like you said, any real world friggin' skills. They have no trade. Yes. They don't know how anything works. They live in their ivory tower. They're swimming in a world of abstract constructs shaped by a governing class that they're supposed to either lead, be a part of, or be auxiliaries to manage with their whatever Oxford Rhodes Scholar conditioning, zombification, or whatever else. And they don't live in the world, and they're ultimately useless. And that's why I think I love Socrates a lot, because when you read these Platonic dialogues, Socrates is always paying much more respect to the shoemaker, to the carpenter, to the people who, because he sees that these are people who are speaking with knowledge of what they're talking about. They have real knowledge that they've worked on through a trade. And so when they speak, it's grounded. They don't have necessarily access to a lot of abstract cultural thoughts or anything. They don't have that, but it's much better than like the sophists, the lawyers, the people like Pericles, who are like utilizing the art of manipulation to cast, hypnotic trances, proto-neurolinguistic programming, which is really what sophistry is, right? You just create like a false thing that you get everybody to agree on using certain emotional colorings or flattery. And then you get their heads nodding and you start building on a fallacy, and before you know it, they're like goose stepping to fucking, put some unacceptable grouping into a gas chamber.
All that sophistry runs right up against all the stuff you talked about earlier, which is that then there's the genetic history and the genetic memory that's built in all of us. And, there's a term, I can't remember who popularized the term, and it bothers me now that I can't remember it. It's the disgust circuit. We all have a disgust circuit that when it's triggered, we know something's wrong. And then we just know it's wrong. And so sexualizing children is wrong. And you can take this thing up to a certain point, and now you're going to sexualize children. No, you're going to, you will get complete and utter pushback against this. There is no way to worm your way out of this with words. You can't do it anymore. This is something that's deep within our DNA, within our very beings. And dude, epigenetics is real. And they're fighting that. And I know that they're fighting it. They think they're going to fight it, in the long run by breeding it out of us and breeding out. It's not going to work. What's going to happen is they're going to run right up against the limits of this, and then we're all just going to go look, and we're just going to go, no, excuse me, you're the one that needs to be out of the gene pool.
Yeah.
And like, you out of the gene pool. Let's go. You out. And I don't know about you. It's not that I want to be a lifeguard for the gene pool, but I certainly want to be the guy telling the lifeguard, oh, by the way, yeah, that's the guy. Like, you know what I mean? Like, at a certain level, no one wants to be the tyrant that finally has to stand up to these people and go, that's enough. You've had your fill, you've had your say. Yeah. It's important that we keep the lines of communication open. We understand what we're dealing with, and we just reject that. We get to a point where we move a cycle forward, and then we reject the crazy, and we move ourselves back to that which we know is to be true. Yeah. And I think we're seeing that. And I think if you look at the way they respond against people, against particular people that they've tried to get rid of and they've tried to marginalize, the Jordan Petersons, the Alex Joneses, and even I've said this before, and I said this the last time you and I spoke. I also monitor the culture, like the film and television culture, to look for signs of where these changes are occurring, because I think it's very important to see what they promote, Marvel, and what they hate, DC, at a very fundamental level. Like our superheroes are our modern incarnations of our of our gods, and in that respect, and like who's the big bad guy? I've said this before. Who's the big bad guy in Marvel? Thanos. Who's
Thanos.
Thanos? He's the ultimate Malthusian. We have to kill off half the universe.
Yeah.
And they tried to make him into a sympathetic character. Like, are you kidding? He's monstrous. He's exactly what, and it's clearly all psychological projection. They are the useless eaters. And we are the universe just trying to understand itself.
Yeah. Well, I was rewatching Kingsman the other day with a friend, and I find it interesting. It's both entertaining, but also an interesting little exercise in psychological manipulation and predictive programming. How they just embed certain concepts into the zeitgeist, because if you can start coloring people's subconscious, I mean, the imagination is where the future exists, right? Like, we relate to the future. It doesn't exist yet. That's the whole point of the future. We have to create it. But we can only create that which we can imagine to be both necessary and possible. Ideally, you want both of those conditions met when you're going to chart out a goal. Is, it's nice to have both of those, right? Is it necessary, and is it possible? Because some things that are necessary are not possible unless you do certain other things, right? I want world peace. Is it necessary? Yeah. How do we get there? Go from 0 to 1,000 like that? You got to.
It's not a step function. This is a process.
Yeah, it's a process orientation, but at the same time, you want to do things that are possible. So necessary and possible. And so the imagination is like the domain of the future's hope, right? So we imagine future situations which will invoke and be shaped by whether or not we are moralized, whether we have hope for the future, whether we love humanity, whether we have respect for ourselves. That will color how we chart out a plan for both our personal future as well as a broader question of a longer wave future for humanity. And I see history as being a clash of different competing ideas of futures. That's what history is. It's like, whether you have people who have a noble impulse, who are tied to a love for humanity and are willing to die for their principles, like a Thomas More, who's like willing to get his head chopped off for his principles, his conscience, or whether you are a slime ball who is willing to be an auxiliary for an oligarchy. Whatever, you have competing ideas of what the future is, and history is sort of like it's shaped by these competing ideas. It's not one finished product in one direction or another. Sometimes you get a dark age, which is usually the consequence of oligarchical ideas that are tolerated and kept in a dominant position for a little bit too long, and that society forgets the knowledge it once had, and it can no longer sustain creatively its own existence, because creativity is, I think it's a viable thing to say, that it's the foundation upon which human existence is premised, can cultivate creative thoughts in sovereign individuals who can then feed back their passion, their inspiration, their creative energy and science and arts and everything else back to the whole, that's going to endure past their death.
And encode those stories in our DNA from generation to generation.
Ultimately, yeah, absolutely. It's all connected, right? The material, the spiritual domains have this interplay, and so it's interesting to look at some of these social engineering innovations that have expressed themselves in a lot of the propaganda, aka Hollywood movies, like The Kingsman, that's talking about the same thing. Samuel L. Jackson is this Bill Gates type character, tech guru who's really obsessed with saving Gaia from the fever that it's in caused by overpopulation, gives out free cell phones, I think it is, and has a whole program set up where everyone's going to rip themselves to shreds. And by the way, when one of his satellites is sabotaged in that movie, who is the guy he gets on the phone with to ask to give him lend him one of his private satellites? It's like, hey, Elon, hook me up with one of your satellites. And Elon's like, yeah, okay. And he does it. But all that to say, it's like, it's entertainment, but it does shape people's idea of what the future is, so that they would be more inclined to just adapt to unjust situations rather than think like a natural human being. Like, that is sick as sin. I'm not going to play along with that or that trajectory. I'm going to do something much healthier. So there's a big influence in that, and movies that can stimulate an opposing, more creative spark. I really respect that. And there's definitely, and
we're in a very weird moment in time where they've had control over those levers for a long time, and most of and they've also corrupted the process of teaching people how to tell stories, write stories,
Yeah.
and construct stories. And this is something that my friend and partner Dexter White and I talk about all the time. And it's why I'm constantly still willing to stay in that cesspit to mine the gems,
Mm.
right? And then see how the world reacts to them in real time, and then say, oh yeah, okay. So by the way, you thought you had us dead to rights with with all of this, and you're just seeing it with Marvel. Like the post Thanos thing has been just a mess, and they're destroying it themselves. And it's classic to watch it because people are just rejecting it all. They're just rejecting all of that. They want a return to stories that mean something. And every once in a while, you have that moment where something that wasn't supposed to be a hit or whatever, or they thought they had it all tied up, and then they had this one thing like defines a generation. This is why I'm still a Star Wars fan, because how do you account for what they did, where they had the state of the American zeitgeist in the mid-70s, and then George Lucas comes around and just says, you know what? Nope, gonna write a fairy tale for the lost generation that has lost its connection to its cultural roots.
Yeah.
That was my generation.
Yeah.
And so of course they systematically attack it, the minute Disney gets a hold of it, and they try to destroy it. And like, and create a false sense using the chattering class, a false sense of what is right and what is wrong and all the rest of it. And then I can do this across multiple domains here and multiple things, but it's very, very clear that there's a wealth and a thirst for real stories that's coming back, and and the entertainment industry is already losing. They've lost this next generation. Like my daughter's generation. Are you kidding me? These kids are already looking at this going, this is all bullshit. These stories don't sustain us.
Yeah.
They don't make us. You know what sustains? You know what gets people? It's like I look and I go, yeah. And then what really gets people sustained is the Hunger Games. Like, and the success of the Hunger Games is something that shouldn't have happened. And guess what? It did. You know why? It was truth. Like, and it was, oh, that's what they have for us. So, here's the trappings of the world they want to create for us. And oh, by the way, here's this one girl says, you know what? No, I'm going to save my sister. That's the story. I mean, that's ultimately what the story of the entire Hunger Games is about. But she just stands up and says, no, like, okay, I'm willing to go through everything imaginable to protect my sister from this life. No, I will do this. And that moment and it's a very powerful thing. And like, and like, I'm dead serious when I say this, like, these things matter, and they can't stamp it out, as much as they like flood the zone with bots on Twitter and fomenting and amplifying through the algorithms, fomenting conflict within fandoms and within groups of people in order to get everybody fighting amongst themselves over what's they've got the Star Wars fans now fighting of Old Testament versus New Testament, when the reality is y'all shouldn't be fighting at all. Like, by the way, you shouldn't be fighting at all as to whether or not it's the new, what's better, what's worse. It doesn't matter. Like, it's going to go up. It's all just a reflection of who you are today, as we are today as people. Because guess what? That's what art does. It reflects where we are at this moment in time. And if you don't like what the New Testament is saying, it's maybe because the world we live in today is even that far, much farther gone than the world that we had originally, and that the story doesn't end when when the Death Star blows up. The real work comes 2 generations later, and what you actually have left over. And there's lessons in there as well. Don't get me wrong. I'll defend the Star Wars films of 7, 8, and 9, because I see what their purpose, what the artists were actually saying, in so many ways against the will of the people who put those things in place, because it's very clear what was happening. But it's going to take those films to be outside of their time for people to appreciate what's going on. Like, no one, like everybody, for example, everybody hated or were pre-programmed to hate The Last Temptation of Christ. Scorsese's The Last Temptation of Christ. Like, I'm old enough to remember this, the controversy over it and everything else. All Scorsese was saying is that if Christianity is as strong an idea, and if Christ's story is as powerful story as it is, we should be able to test it. We should be able to stretch it and test it and see if it breaks. And if it doesn't break after having been tested to its limit, then it's even that much more powerful than we thought it was in the first place. That's what Scorsese was doing with The Last Temptation of Christ. And in some ways, I can actually make the argument today for Star Wars fans that that's where Rian Johnson's The Last Jedi is, which is that, and this is the argument, is that he tested the mythology of Luke Skywalker to its core. And then he still comes out a great Christ-like figure. And yeah, Star Wars' mythology is actually stronger. It's actually built on stronger foundations than we even thought it was. But we're going to have it criticized. And if it's criticizable and still strong and still winds up being strong afterwards, then it's valid. And that is the part that so many people are having struggle with. And I mean this, it doesn't matter what story you talk about here, that's powerful to people. And it's just like, you should be able to test the mythology around Batman or Superman or any of these archetypal figures, and then see if they break or not. And if they don't break, then now you can build, and now you can use them to help the next two generations tell stories that will help us get out of this terrible scenario that we're in today. Okay. And that's, so you almost have to have, the Batman as the villain in Zack Snyder's universe in order for Matt Reeves to do his version of Batman that came out 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, which is powerful, by the way, really powerful story. And so as I watch these things happen, I'm like, this is where we're going to find our cultural touchstones in order to go forward. Because that's, look, the popular culture is a very important thing. And this is how we work these things out. And this is the stuff that will set the next generation of artists and set their moral compass going forward, and then help to teach the next generations going forward. And these people are complete, and the people we're talking about, the Klaus Schwabs and the Soroses and the rest, they understand this. That's why they're like hell bent on tearing all of these things down.
Yeah.
Like, we're not allowed to have any nice things.
Well, I can definitely agree with you 100% on that, on those points of principle. As far as like the particular examples that you raised, I have a divergent interpretation of
sure,
some of those things. But that being said, absolutely, I see this as like the primary battleground to everything is really the cultural warfare front, which is where the heart, which is the foundation upon which the mind is built, it goes to rot and decay or to being strengthened. And if you have a strong heart, you've got a strong faith in principles of goodness in yourself, in humanity, in the universe, in God's creation. If that's your view, if it's built upon a strong faith in that sense, which is strengthened by your education, by the stories you're given, we're a storytelling society. We wrap our concepts in imagery and allegory and metaphor, in poetry and literature. I mean, that's the way we transmit big ideas that you can't really describe in a literalistic way. Yeah, through multiple generations, and it has things that change and things that stay the same. And I think that if you have loving storytellers who have insight and real wisdom, they will make sure that those stories enhance and strengthen the best qualities of human beings as part of their educational experience as they mature. And you never stop reading stories. Like, there's no point where we're like, okay, I'm old enough to stop caring about stories now. I can now just be a technocrat or a technician with serious endeavors. Percy Shelley, that's why he wrote his In Defense of Poetry back in 1819 or 20. It was published only after he died, but he wrote it in response to a fellow who wrote the 4 stages of poetry or of the arts. And this person who is actually working for the British Foreign Office is we're told they're friends. They were having a friendly back and forth. It's like, no. I read the Four Stages, and I'm forgetting the full title now, that Shelley is disgusted by. But this guy's trying to make the case that, look, the works of Homer, of Aeschylus, they're just so grandiose and great. We could never, every generation has been worse and worse. But we've come to the point now where humanity went through the infantile, childlike state. Like they were that great in ancient Athens because of their childlike ignorance to technology and science. That's where they had all of their time to put into creativity. And now that we have a scientific society with mercantilism and all of these other things, that's where we should all put all of our creative energy, is just being utilitarian economists and just learn technical, practical skills. And Shelley's just ultimately horrified. And he makes
no, absolutely. No, absolutely. No, I agree. And that'll bring me back. And what I find is that, and what I always find is that, you can, when you're talking about artists, and I always like to come back to Alan Moore, who wrote Watchmen. I always come back because Alan Moore is a hardcore left-wing anarchist of the Marxist variety. But if you read Watchmen carefully, it's very much the Hegelian dialectic as the Hobbesian dialectic of why we need a state and all that writ large, and whatnot. But if you look at the way Watchmen is organized, it's executed. Alan Moore is an artist first and a propagandist second, because he's even betrayed what he thinks is his own ideology is betrayed by the passion with which he wrote certain characters. And he even embedded the basic what's the word I'm looking for, inconsistencies in the stated aims of both him, the artist, and the characters who were in effect his mouthpiece, into the text of Watchmen. And it's why we all read Watchmen or watch the movie, and we all identify with Rorschach, who's the character he fucking despises, because he's the antipode. Yeah, he's the Randian detective.
Justice, he can't compromise.
And he turns into a violent psychopath, but who's the only person with a moral center in the entire fucking story.
But he was totally disorganized. Like he hadn't taken the time to develop wisdom in himself. He was just sort of
but what I'm
he didn't temper the poet's zeal with worldliness, in a sense. So he was just like this underdeveloped character with this strong moral conscience, but he didn't have the tools to express his
and that's fine. But actually even that's an even better commentary on the person with the moral center in living in 20th century, in the late 20th century America under the auspice of nuclear war. Like I can trace Rorschach all the way back to the narrator in The Wasteland. It's J. Alfred Prufrock and T.S. Eliot, because it's all the same shit. Like, dude, seriously, I've studied all this crap, and these are the foundational stories for me. And like, you look at and to me, this is all just really, really important stuff. But I look at Alan Moore and I read Watchmen carefully now, and I've read Watchmen from multiple different perspectives, and I'm like, and I reference it all the time. I'm like, oh, it's very obvious what he's trying to do, but his own inherent humanity as a person, as an artist, can't be overcome by his cynicism about the way he thinks the world actually operates. That's the thing. That's what I'm trying to get at here. And so even the most compromised or cynical artist, if he's true to his art, still tells truth. And not to his ideology. And so Moore actually makes the best argument imaginable against corporatism and Marxism and all of it. Like it actually winds up being that way when you really read Watchmen carefully. So and honestly, like a guy like Zack Snyder saw that, and that's why he shifted the narrative for the movie the way he did. It's why he reframed the bad guy as Dr. Manhattan, and he did it on purpose. And the text of all of Snyder's movies are the individual comes first.
And Ozymandias, is that Dr. Manhattan in that?
No, Ozymandias is the bad guy. Right.
he's the blue guy who wants to
But Dr. Manhattan is Dr.
hit the
Manhattan, the
reset
blue guy,
button,
and then
right?
Ozymandias is the guy who beats God.
Right.
Adrian is the guy who beats God, right? And so, yeah, no, this is a. I mean, I can do 3 hours on fucking Watchmen alone. Trust me on this one. I've even done the whole thing as a takedown. Why is fatally flawed, because it just betrays basic human. It just betrays basic human understanding of economics and human behavior. Like it's just dumb. But the whole thing is there's a very subtle point that I'm trying to make here, which is that the artist that crafts the stories that we respond to, if he's a true artist, will put aside his personal bias and just channel the inherent truth of being human.
Hmm.
And
Right.
and suppress, and he can't help himself. He's going to it's going to show up, and
Yeah.
it's going to show up in the work, and that's the fun. And I find the tension in a touchstone piece of literature like Watchmen to be the best example of that. That's why I keep coming back to it, because everybody has read it, and everybody's and you can always read it, cynically, but you can really read it carefully, and you read it from the perspective of the person that who wrote it, and
Yeah.
you've listened to what he says. You're like, oh,
There's
yeah,
there's a there's
you didn't even realize what you wrote, dude. It's the classic thing about Hemingway and The Old Man and the Sea. And it
well
was asked, and Hemingway was asked once, did you realize at the end of The Old Man and the Sea, when the old man is carrying the mast of what's left of his boat, after his boat's destroyed, and he's carrying it up the dock up to his shack, and he's literally carrying the mast on his shoulder like Christ carrying the cross up Golgotha, the hill of Golgotha, and he's like, did you realize that your character had become a Christ figure at that point? He's like, no, dude, I just wrote the story that was there.
yeah.
Like, that's the way Hemingway, like, he's like, no, I just wrote the story. So Hemingway was channeling all of this and didn't even realize it.
There's a segment that this reminds me of from Shelley's In Defense of Poetry again, where
Mm-hmm.
Shelley writes, he describes this sort of process, this spirit of the times, which sometimes it sweeps people up for good or for bad. And he's specifically talking about, like he's looking at the Napoleonic age, he's looking at the clampdown on creativity that's happening out of the Congress of Vienna, but he's also looking at the great hope that was also there when he was a child for a world that would supersede hereditary institutions. He was,
Mm-hmm.
he wrote treaties on the importance of republican ideals for Europe. So that was the great hope that what was done in the U.S. was going to spread into Europe. But it failed. There was political subversions that derailed it. But he writes, I pulled it up here, at such periods, or the most unfailing herald, companion, and follower of the awakening of a great people to work a beneficial change in opinion or institution is poetry. At such periods, there is an accumulation of the power of communicating and receiving intense and impassioned conceptions respecting man and nature. The person in whom this power resides may often, as far as regards many portions of their nature, have little apparent correspondence with that spirit of good of which they are the ministers. But, and this is where I was thinking, like, that the artist sometimes is not even aware of what they're ministering, right? But even whilst they themselves deny and abjure, they are yet compelled to serve that power which is seated on the throne of their own soul. Yep. And he goes on, and he says, it is impossible to read the compositions of the most celebrated writers of our age without being startled by the electric life which burns within their words. And he goes on, and it's beautiful.
Remember, we're talking all around this. We're talking about Watchmen. We're talking about Shelley, and who wrote the seminal poem Ozymandias?
Exactly, it's Shelley. Yeah, and that's a beautiful poem.
It all comes right back around, dude. Like,
yeah, I met a traveler from an ancient land, and and this guy is just
exactly
walking through the desert, and he's
I'm literally looking at it right now. I just wanted to make sure, because and he wrote that, published first on January 11th, 1818, in the Examiner.
Exactly. And you can't remove the historical context that he's writing this from his idea and what he's communicating within the Mask of Anarchy as well, around the same time, where he's directly attacking Lord Castlereagh, the guy that Aaron Burr was meeting with, that was organizing the Congress of Vienna, that Shelley is directly calling out for the Mask of Anarchy. And Ozymandias, if you've got in front of you, you want to read it? I mean,
no, I could pull it out, but I will butcher it because I haven't.
He's like, basically, he's got this guy. It's just this beauty of this thing that he's met a traveler from who'd been walking.
I can do it. I've got it in front of me. If you really want me to read it, I will. Ozymandias by Percy Bysshe Shelley. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of old command, that tell its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal, these words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside me remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away.
I love it. It just dispels the mystique of the oligarchy, right? This arrogant, godlike figures look upon me in despair. And it's like ancient destroyed ruins of this guy.
Yes, exactly. I know. They spend all their time trying to convince us of shit that's not true.
Yeah.
And my favorite quote by my favorite writer is still from Philip K. Dick. Reality is that which, when you stop believing in it, doesn't go away. The man who wrote millions of words in his life distilled almost all of human existence down to that. This is one of the most, I think, one of the most dense and profound statements ever by a human being. That reality is that which, when we stop believing in it, doesn't go away.
I love those simple definitions. I love it. So, what is time? It's this thing that stops all things from happening all at once. It's like, I love it. It's like, yeah.
Yeah, I rarely have moments of Oscar Wilde level of brevity being the soul of wit, but every once in a while I can pull out Philip K. Dick and I can use that one and go, that's it. I don't need to say anything else.
So. Yeah. Yeah. Or like Einstein's idea too, like of like, well, what is truth? Or no, when he says, that truth, if it merits truth, should always be explained in the simplest way possible, but never simpler. It's another, just love it. It's like, yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Matt, this has been an absolute blast. I've really enjoyed every moment of it. And just, I think, to remind everybody that while I think all of us, we're feeling the anxiety that these, to use my friend Dexter White's term, anxiety pimps place upon us, that we still have all of the power and they don't. And it's just a matter of reminding ourselves of the power that we have to shape our thoughts and lay our will upon the universe in a way that is not tyrannical, that is going to get us out of this, and to remain and to keep our empathy and to keep our humanity while this plays itself out. That's what drives me to do all this. Is why I wanted to have you on today to talk about some of the historical context of these things. Really appreciate that. Any final thoughts on this? And of course, plug yourself and do all the things that you need to do.
Absolutely. No, Tom, this is very much, I look forward to our conversations. It breaks the mold. It's definitely what I think. I mean, this is soul food for me. I hope that other people feel the same way. And as far as self-promotion, yeah, thank you. Sure, I'll do that. So I already referred to my book series, Untold History of Canada, as well as The Clash of the Two Americas. One's a 4-volume set on the roundtable manipulation of Canadian history from the standpoint of recognizing that Canada as well is not a finished product. It's had moments of nearly being born, but then ultimately being sabotaged and derailed into remaining part of a monarchical global deep state apparatus designed to sabotage such things as the danger of U.S.-Russian relations and economic development around the Arctic, around the sale of Alaska. You can't, if you don't look at that global chemistry, you can't understand what the hell happened in Canada from 1776, when we should have been, but we failed to accept Ben Franklin's offer to be the 14th member colony, saying together that we will declare independence. That didn't happen. You won't understand why unless you recognize these British manipulation and these intrigues. And you won't understand why it is that British Columbia didn't become part of the United States and continue that transcontinental railway up through the West Coast into Alaska and through into China and Russia back in the 1870s, which was originally the design. You won't know that. So, that whole series goes through that stuff. My wife also just published a book, her first book, last night. It's now available, called The Empire on Which the Black Sun Never Set, on Anglo-American foreign policy and the rise of fascism as a 20th century phenomenon. Scary stuff, really interesting. So that's going to be on the Canadian Patriot website, all of those books, canadianpatriot.org. And risingtidefoundation.net is our educational cultural platform where we, go more into movies, cinema, literature, stuff like that. So that's stuff people can explore if they're bored.
Excellent. I'm going to leave you with one thing. There's a joke I heard recently about, and I've used this previously, and other people have heard me say it. So, why did the sun never set on the British Empire?
Because the God never.
Because God didn't want these people running around in the fucking dark.
Yeah.
And on that note, my friend, you have a very good afternoon, and we will talk again soon.
All right, you too. Bye.
Well, that'll about wrap it up for episode 121 of the Gold, Ghosts, and Guns podcast. I hope you enjoyed having Matt Ehret back on the show as much as I did, because I don't know about you guys, but I had a blast. So, and frankly, anything that at this point in my life tickles my balls is the thing that, is going to get done, because, otherwise, what's the point? So, as always, you can follow me at my blog at tomluongo.me. You can follow me on Twitter at TFL1728. As of course, you can sign up for the Patreon at patreon.com/goldgoatsandguns, where you can join me in my journey to parse the headlines with private blog posts and twice weekly market reports, where I tie all the geopolitics and events of the day to what's happening in the capital markets. So, with that said, I'm out. You guys be well. You take care. We'll talk soon. Keep your stick on, guys.